The massacre in the Naliboki Forest, Belarus, involving the mass execution of approximately 1,000 people, is one of the many atrocities committed by Nazi forces during their occupation of Eastern Europe in World War II. This tragedy is often overshadowed by larger, more publicized events, but it holds a significant place in the history of Nazi war crimes in Belarus. Here's a detailed overview. Historical background location: Naliboki Forest, Belarus, a large wooded area in western Belarus near the town of Naliboki, located in what was then the Belarusian SSR of the Soviet Union. Date: the massacre occurred primarily in 1943, though Nazi atrocities in the area spanned from 1941 to 1944. Occupying force: Nazi German SS units, assisted by local collaborators and, in some cases, auxiliary police or other pro-Nazi units. Events: German occupation of Belarus. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa in June 1941. Belarus was quickly occupied, and Nazi forces implemented their genocidal policies, including the extermination of Jews, reprisals against partisans, and destruction of villages. Resistance and partisan warfare. Naliboki Forest became a stronghold for Soviet partisans, many of whom were Jewish survivors fleeing ghettos. These partisans carried out sabotage and ambushes against German troops and infrastructure. In response, the Nazis launched large-scale anti-partisan operations, often targeting civilians suspected of helping or being sympathetic to the partisans. The massacre itself: in mid-1943, the Nazis launched a punitive expedition into the Naliboki Forest area. Operation Hermann, July-August 1943, was a major German anti-partisan operation involving over 50,000 troops. Under the guise of rooting out partisans, German units surrounded villages, rounded up civilians, and massacred them indiscriminately. In and around Naliboki village, nearly 1,000 people were executed: men, women, and children, often in mass shootings, and their homes were burned. Many of the victims were also tortured before being killed. Some were burned alive in barns or executed en masse in nearby pits. Legacy: the massacre was part of the broader scorched earth policy as the Nazis began retreating from Soviet territory. The Naliboki massacre is commemorated in Belarus today, but like many events in Eastern Europe, it's complex due to overlapping loyalties, partisan conflicts, and post-war Soviet narratives. A controversial part of the legacy involves the role of non-German collaborators, including Polish or Belarusian auxiliary forces, although exact responsibilities remain debated. In modern times, efforts by historians and Holocaust researchers have helped uncover the scale of atrocities committed in Naliboki and other Belarusian regions. Significance: the Naliboki massacre exemplifies the Nazi policy of collective punishment and their brutal repression of resistance. It highlights the suffering of rural populations caught between Nazi terror and partisan warfare. It remains a symbol of resistance and martyrdom in Belarusian historical memory. Investigation and remembrance of the Naliboki Forest massacre in more depth. Survivor accounts and testimonies. Though many perished, a number of villagers survived the massacre either by hiding in the forest or escaping during the chaos. Some of their testimonies were recorded decades later and give us a horrifying look at what happened. Survivors described how entire families were locked in barns, which were then set ablaze, and how infants were thrown into fire or shot in front of their parents. In some cases, villagers were used as human shields or forced to walk ahead of German columns to detect partisans. Those who managed to flee often joined partisan brigades in the forest, fighting in increasingly desperate conditions. These testimonies were collected by Soviet war crimes investigators and later Belarusian and international Holocaust documentation efforts. However, due to Soviet censorship and Cold War politics, these stories were often buried or sanitized until the 1990s and 2000s. Post-war investigations and controversies. Soviet period, 1945 to 1991. After the war,
Soviet authorities documented Nazi crimes, but their focus was often on partisan heroism rather than Jewish or village victimhood. Some investigations were launched, but many perpetrators were never brought to justice, as they either fled to Western
countries or were protected by Cold War alliances. Official Soviet narratives frequently ignored Jewish suffering specifically, subsuming it under the broader category of Soviet citizens. 2. Modern investigations. In the early 2000s, Poland's Institute of National Remembrance, IPN, launched a controversial investigation into the Naliboki massacre. This was spurred by claims that Soviet partisans, including some Jewish units, committed atrocities in the area in 1943, specifically a separate incident involving the killing of 128 Polish villagers in Naliboki on May 8, 1943. That event is distinct from the Nazi massacre later in 1943, but caused confusion in public discourse. The IPN later concluded that Jewish partisans were not involved in the earlier incident, but the affair sparked debates around memory, collaboration, and ethnic tension in the region. Local memorials in post-Soviet Belarus, a memorial cross and plaque, were erected in the Naliboki area to honor the dead. Annual services and commemorations are held, often attended by descendants, historians, and political leaders. Educational efforts. Belarusian historians and educators have been working to include local massacres like Naliboki in school curricula and public historical narratives. International. Organizations, including Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, have included the Naliboki region in broader studies of the Holocaust by bullets and Nazi anti-partisan campaigns. Cultural memory. In Belarusian literature and art, the massacre is remembered as a symbol of the rural, civilian cost of war. Naliboki Forest itself has become an enduring symbol of resistance and survival, as both tragedy and sanctuary. The mass execution of 1,000 civilians in the Naliboki Forest by the Nazis represents a deliberate policy of terror aimed not only at destroying partisan resistance but also at intimidating and exterminating the local population. It forms part of the broader genocide and ethnic cleansing campaigns carried out in Belarus and across Eastern Europe by Nazi Germany. This massacre, while lesser known internationally, remains a crucial chapter in the collective memory of Belarus, one that continues to shape historical discourse, identity, and justice efforts today. Lasting implications, historical debates, and global recognition of the Naliboki Forest massacre, historical debates and memory politics. The Naliboki massacre and the broader events in the region have become flashpoints in historical memory conflicts, particularly between Belarus, Poland, and Jewish communities. These debates often revolve around who was responsible, how events are remembered, and what narratives dominate public discourse. Belarusian Perspective. Belarus honors the victims primarily through the lens of patriotic resistance and martyrdom. State-backed narratives often emphasize the heroism of Soviet partisans while avoiding sensitive topics like local collaboration or the unique suffering of Jews. The massacre fits into the broader Belarusian national story of having lost 1 in 4 citizens during WWII, the highest proportional death toll in Europe. Polish perspective. Some Polish historians have examined both the Nazi and Soviet atrocities in Naliboki. Polish citizens in the area were targeted both by German occupation forces and partisan units, leading to complicated local memories. The Polish IPN's 2001-2009 investigation into the May 1943 massacre of Polish civilians by Soviet partisans, distinct from the Nazi massacre, created international tensions, especially around the sensitive topic of Jewish partisans. Jewish perspective. For Jewish survivors and historians, Naliboki is remembered both as a site of Jewish resistance, many Jewish partisans operated from the forest, and of genocide, as Jews from surrounding ghettos were also among those executed. Organizations like Yad Vashem and the Shoah Foundation have documented testimonies of Jewish partisans and victims tied to Naliboki and the surrounding forests. Global recognition. In commemoration, while not as well known as massacres like Oradour-sur-Glane, France, or Lidis, Czech Republic, the Naliboki Forest massacre is increasingly gaining recognition in 1. Academic research studies on Nazi anti-partisan operations, especially Operation Hermann, now include detailed discussions of Naliboki. Holocaust scholars are incorporating Naliboki into the broader understanding of the Holocaust by bullets, a term describing mass shootings of Jews and civilians in Eastern Europe by mobile killing units. Digital archives and memorials international digital projects, such as the Yahad in Unum initiative, founded by Father Patrick Desbois, U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos, and the Belarusian State Museum of the History of the Great Patriotic War, all mention Naliboki in broader contexts. 3. Documentary and literature. Documentaries and survivor memoirs often highlight Naliboki as a setting for both horror and defiance. Notably, the story of the Bielski partisans, depicted in the film Defiance, unfolded in the same forests, a few miles away. Unfinished business. Justice and recognition. Despite decades passing since WWII, justice for the victims of the Naliboki massacre remains largely symbolic. Few, if any, of the perpetrators were ever tried for the massacre specifically. Several suspected war criminals fled to North America or Western Europe, but were never extradited or prosecuted.